and welcome to Puffin Storytime. I'm Ed Clarke, and I'm the author of The Secret Dragon. And I'm going to be reading it to you today, starting at chapter 1, which seems like a good place to start. Bump, bump, bump. Mary's head banged repeatedly against the window of the beaten-up Land Rover as it bounced through the uneven field. Mary stared straight ahead, oblivious. This wasn't where she wanted to be. Bump, bump, bump. Out of the corner of her eye, Mary could see her mum, Rhian, trying to think of something to say. Might knock some sense into me, sighed Mary. Rhian smiled, but Mary didn't turn round. They returned to their customary awkward silence. Rain started spattering the windscreen. Rhian engaged the ancient wipers and they squeaked and creaked the window, a smeary kind of clean. After what seemed like an age, Rhian pulled up in the corner of a field. Mary could see the calf lying on the ground, its breathing rapid and shallow. Her mum nodded towards it. Why don't you go and take a look this time? Mary frowned. This wasn't how it usually worked. Normally, Rhian would go and see a sick animal, and Mary would only help if help were required. But I don't know what to do. You're old enough now, Mary, said Rhian, with an encouraging nod. It would be a help to me. But it wasn't that simple. Caring for animals was in Rhian's blood. She had an instinct for it. Mary couldn't even keep a woodlouse in a matchbox overnight without it expiring. Her father hadn't been a natural farmer either. He'd been a geologist, but he did have green fingers. Creating a kitchen garden behind the farmhouse. Everyone said he and Rhian made the perfect team. And then, after that storm, the team was just Rhian and Mary. It wasn't perfect anymore. Now her dad's once beautifully tended garden was a sad, tangled mess. Rhian had to spend all her time in the fields with the cows, and Mary was expected to help, whether she wanted to or not. Against her better judgment, Mary creaked open the rusty Land Rover door and rolled out into the rain. It was coming horizontally off the Bristol Channel and made her squint. She bent down in front of the calf, tentatively holding out a hand to pat its head, trying to stay as far away from it as possible. What's the problem? She whispered, trying not to look at it directly in the eye. The calf let out a strangled moo. She could feel it shivering under her hand. I know you can't communicate verbally, she said, but I'm going to guess that you're cold and need some kind of shelter for warmth, so let's get you inside. Gripping the calf's flanks, Mary tried to raise it up onto its feet, but it bellowed out in pain. Rhian was already out of the car and hurrying towards them. Mary, stop, she yelled. Mary jumped back. What? Rhian held the calf still. It's got a broken leg. You can't move it. But how would I know that? Pleaded Mary. I'm sorry, it's my fault, said Rhian more quietly now. I shouldn't have asked you. Chastened, Mary climbed back into the vehicle and watched through the mud-splattered window as Rhian tended to the calf. She found a bag of Haribo in the glove compartment and guiltily started working her way through it. The bag was finished and discarded on the floor by the time the driver's door opened again. I'll need to get the vet out, said Rhian as she turned the key in the ignition and shifted the gears into reverse. Is it okay if I... asked Mary, pointing to a sturdy rucksack on the back seat. Now? Asked Rhian. We've got that fence to repair in the corner paddock and bales to stack in the barn. There was never nothing to do on the farm, and it always needed doing yesterday. While it's still light, begged Mary. Do you really have to, love? Mary slumped back. She knew her plans were going to have to wait, just like they always did. But for once, Rhian sighed and relented. I suppose the bales can wait till Saturday. But stay away from the cliffs in case there's a rockfall. It's more dangerous when it's been raining, and watch the tides. I know all this, Mum. Mary jumped up eagerly before her mum changed her mind. She slammed the door behind her, slung the bag over her shoulder and nodded an apology to the calf. A spring now back in her step, Mary hiked across the field towards a gate. Climbing over it, she paused for a moment to take in the view. The rain was easing off now, and the sun was breaking through the heavy clouds, throwing shafts of light down on the Glamorgan coast, a across the channel and onto the Somerset Hills beyond. Off to her right, a pristine white lighthouse seemed spotlit on the cliff top. A bit like that one back there. She smiled to herself and jumped down, making her way along a hedgerow towards the cliff path. But before long, she was down on the beach. She breathed deeply as the sea breeze gently pushed her hair back from her face. This was Mary in her element. She swung her rucksack down onto the rocks, pulled it wide open and gazed lovingly inside. "Hello again, my friends," she said. One by one she lifted out the contents. A large hammer, a chisel, a brush, and last but not least, a white hard hat and a pair of clear safety glasses. Let's get to work. Chapter 2. Mary loved this coastline at any time of the day, but the magic hour of dusk was her favourite. The sun bathed the limestone cliffs in a warm orange light, and if it was clear enough you could see the great glowing ball drop straight into the narrow patch of sea where it divided Devon from the Pembrokeshire coast. This was where her father used to bring her down the beach when she was little. She remembered him telling her stories about the layers of rock and how they were formed, about the great sea creatures that had swum in the waters beneath their feet millions of years ago. At least Mary had assumed they were just stories, until the day they found a fossil on the beach that proved what he was saying was true. That fossil was now her most prized possession. It was an Anningella, a scallop shell named after one of the most famous fossil hunters in history, Mary Anning. Her dad had told Mary that when Mary was alive in the 19th century, no one believed her stories either. Not just because giant sea monsters seemed very unlikely, but because she was a woman. And in those days, the idea of being a woman, being a scientist and making important discoveries was seen as ridiculous. And then he held Mary by the shoulders and said, "Don't let anyone stop you being who you want to be." Mary had never forgotten her father's words, and as she walked along the beach with her fossil hunting kit, she knew she never would. However much her mum needed her to be someone else, she was going to be the person she wanted to be. She wasn't in the least bit interested in cows. She was going to be a paleontologist, a scientist like her dad. The layered cliffs of the Glamorgan Heritage Coast were like the leaves of a giant history book, just waiting for her to turn the pages. Who knew what ancient creatures might be found between the layers of limestone and shale? Mary leapt effortlessly from boulder to boulder along the stony beach. She spotted a fresh rockfall just ahead. The cliff where the rock had cleaved away was a bright yellowy orange, shining out between the weather-worn strata on either side. The tumbled rocks lay beneath in a great sloping pile. It was like a pirate giant had emptied out her mammoth treasure chest, leaving Mary to hunt out all the jewels. It didn't take long before her eye caught a curving shape cutting across one of the rocks. It was segmented and looked a little like a snail shell. Snakestone, her father would have laughed. Because that's what people used to think they were. Serpents that had been turned to stone. But Mary knew better. The fact was far more interesting than the fiction. It was the petrified remains of an ammonite, an extinct sea creature that had lived over 65 million years ago. Mary patted her hard hat to make sure it was secure, pushed her protective glasses up the bridge of her nose. Then she knelt down and got to work with her hammer and chisel, chipping away the rock around the ancient animal. The sun was setting gloriously behind her, but Mary wasn't interested in such an everyday occurrence. In the palm of her hand, she was holding an ammonite, just like this one. See? The first human ever to hold it. A jolt of excitement ran through her. She imagined herself rocketing back like a time-travelling explorer to the moment when the creature first fell to the seabed, when ichthyosaurs snapped at a prehistoric fish above. "Nice rock," said a voice somewhere above her. Mary jumped up in shock. A boy of about her age was sitting higher up the rockfall, staring down at her. She hadn't seen him before. He had a dark complexion, a shock of long fizzing curls, and a fringe that kept blowing into his face. "Pretty here, isn't it?" he continued, looking out at the sunset. Mary raised her hand and pointed at the rocks he was perched on. "You shouldn't be sitting up there," she said. "It's dangerous when it's been raining. It erodes the cliffs, causes rocks to fall." "Like these?" He pointed down to the rocks she was sitting on. She nodded. That why? He patted his head, indicating the hard hat. She nodded again. What about? He pointed to his two eyes with his fingers. Mary took off her safety glasses self-consciously and folded them up. For stray chips, she said, half under her breath. The boy smirked. Stray chips, he repeated to himself with a smile. Mary wasn't sure whether he was teasing her or not. She knew that most people at school thought she was a weird science kid. Fionn and her class refused to sit next to her because she was afraid Mary might do experiments on her. To be fair, Mary had put quite some time into thinking what kind of experiment she would do on Fionn, given half the chance, but nothing suitably stomach-churning had yet occurred to her. You wouldn't like one in your eye, said Mary. Sounds nasty, he said, flipping back his fringe. Thanks for the tip. The boy sounded sincere. Mary wondered if she'd misjudged him. Why was it so hard to work other people out? This was why she was better off without friends. She didn't understand how the being popular thing worked. It seemed to be based on doing what everyone else did and liking what everyone else liked, and then being nasty about anyone who didn't do or like the same things. But Mary knew what she liked, and she knew it was different from everyone else. What are you doing down there, anyway? Asked the boy. Mary decided to cut to the chase. I'm a paleontologist, she announced. Nice, replied the boy. I'm a Methodist. Now, Mary really didn't know if he was joking. It's a scientist who studies fossils. You don't say, the boy smiled as he stood up to leave. I prefer animals that still have a heartbeat myself. He took a step forward and slipped slightly, setting off a mini landslide that narrowly missed Mary's feet. He held his hand up in an apology. Do you have any more of those? He said, nodding towards her hard hat. Not sure I've got any the right size, said Mary. You've got a lot of hair. Well, you're not wrong there, the boy chuckled, turning to make his way back up the beach. Mary wasn't sure whether he was laughing with her or at her again. She watched him disappear over the cliff top before casting her eyes down at the rocks he'd caused to slide to her feet. One looked different from the rest as it lay there, illuminated by the setting sun. It seemed to have a redder hue. A crack had opened up down the middle, and she knew that all it would take was one blow from her chisel to cleave it in two. Mary couldn't resist. This was the fossil hunter's lucky dip. What would be inside? 99 times nothing, 1 time something. The boy was instantly forgotten. She knelt down beside the stone, fitted the end of her chisel into the crack and rested her hammer on it for a moment, partly to prepare for the blow and partly to savour the anticipation. Then she raised the hammer and brought it down on top of the chisel with one swift, accurate crack. The rock fell apart so easily it almost seemed relieved. Mary lifted her safety glasses to get a better look at what had been revealed. This was not one of the nothing in 99 times. This was most definitely a something. Coiled inside one half of the rock was a tiny, dusty, reptilian shape. It couldn't have been more than 10 centimetres long. It looked a bit like a crested newt with an elongated tail, but it certainly wasn't one of those. For a start, it only had 2 legs at the back, which were more like an eagle's claws than a newt's padded feet. And secondly, and most strikingly, it had 2 folded-up wings sprouting from its shoulder blades. Mary's mind ran through the possibilities. An Archaeopteryx? A pterodactyl? But it was too small for either of those. It was unlike any fossil she'd ever seen, unlike any animal she'd ever seen alive or dead. She cleaned off the dust carefully with her brush and gently lifted it out of the rock to rest in her palm. It certainly didn't feel as heavy as a normal fossil. She took it down to the sea to wash it, and as she sluiced the last of the dust off its body, it gleamed a deep ruby red. She could see all its tiny individual scales shining in the evening light. What was it? Mary was still completely stumped. She held the fossil up to the day's last light and marvelled at its delicacy. As the sun was sucked beneath the watery horizon, its light seemed to flash a brilliant green for just a second before disappearing from view, and as it did so, the tiny creature's tail uncoiled very slowly across Mary's skin, as lightly as the graze of an uncurling fern. Mary swallowed hard. Whatever this animal was, it certainly wasn't a fossil. This wasn't a creature that was alive 200 million years ago. It was alive right now. Chapter 3. Mary had to stop herself trembling. She brought her left hand round to cup her right and hold it still. Every nerve in her body was tingling with the electric excitement of discovery. The clouds on the horizon were uplit by a blaze of pink and orange, and it cast a warm glow across the creature's crimson body. Mary had already noticed the talons on its 2 legs, but now that the seawater had washed the dust away, she could make out the crest on its head, which sparkled in the dying light, reflecting back colours like a prism. The creature languidly swished its tail from side to side, luxuriating in the warm evening air. Mary reached out a shaking hand to stroke it, and the tail coiled itself around her outstretched finger. But it wasn't like a snake squeezing its prey. It was more an expression of affection. So Mary wasn't scared. In any case, she was far too in awe of what she was witnessing to be afraid. With the animal gently attached to her finger, Mary lifted it to her face for an even closer look. As she gazed on in wonder, the creature slowly unfolded its wings. Backlit by the twilight glow, they were almost translucent, stretching out on each side of its body as wide as its tail was long. Mary thought she had never seen anything as beautiful before in her life. And then it opened its eyes. Mary gasped as 2 bright green pinheads blinked open on either side of the creature's skull, vivid against its ruby skin. Their eyes instantly locked together, earth brown to emerald green. Suddenly the animal unfurled its tail and fell from Mary's finger onto a large bare rock. Mary yelped, scrabbling to gather it back up. Then she let out another cry, her finger pricked by a sharp talon. Whatever it was, it seemed the beast didn't want to be picked up again. It was dragging itself around on the rock, one wing flapping, the other tucked away at an awkward angle. "Please don't be broken," pleaded Mary, glad that her mother hadn't been here to see her drop the delicate creature. "Please." Gently, she tried to scoop it up again, but every time she thought she'd cornered it, it squirmed out of her grasp, whipping its tail to and fro and scurrying under rocks to escape. "I didn't mean to hurt you," said Mary, tentatively rolling back stones. "I'll be more careful, I promise." Finally, she found it again, cowering in a shadowy nook above a rock pool. Both wings were tucked away now, and it no longer seemed to be hurt. Mary sighed in relief and peeled off the cardigan she was wearing. "This is just to keep you safe," she explained as she threw it over the animal, collecting it up in a makeshift woolly blanket and depositing it in her rucksack. That bag had held plenty of ancient and extraordinary creatures over the years, but this was the first that was in danger of escaping by itself. She pulled the drawstring tight and buckled the straps, and with the pink blush of dusk now fading to grey, it was going to get cold and dark very soon. Mary gently swung the bag over her shoulders and set off up the beach for home. The walk back gave Mary time to think. What would she tell her mum? She ran through the likely consequences in her mind. Firstly, her mum wouldn't trust her to keep the creature alive. Whether or not Rhian was right to think that, the last thing Mary wanted right now was to have it taken away. Secondly, her mother would want to tell someone about her discovery, and Mary wasn't sure she was ready for that just yet either. Not before she'd worked out what it was, at least, because she knew it was special. She had never heard of a creature that had hatched out of stone. It was likely to be the most important thing she would ever find, and she wanted to know everything she could about it. Thank you for joining me at Puffin Storytime. I hope to see you again soon.